Today we are announcing a historic indictment. This case involves 33 defendants. It's a massive drug trafficking conspiracy spanning nearly a decade, involving tremendous volumes of fentanyl and narcotics.
When the DEA raided police stations across Texas, they expected corruption. They didn't expect a cartel blueprint hiding in plain sight. But buried in the seized files was something no one saw coming: a list of active duty officers still feeding intel to El Mencho's men. Let's dive in. The raid that shook Texas. It all began before sunrise. Federal convoys cut across the dark back roads of central Texas, their engines low but urgent, blue and white lights washing through the fog. A dozen unmarked SUVs, a few armored carriers, what looked, at least from a distance, like the start of a coordinated law enforcement strike. Local chatter would later claim it was a DEA-led operation against cartel infiltration inside Texas police departments. A raid so vast, it would make national headlines by dawn.
An FBI operation ended in dozens arrested, including police officers, sheriff's deputies, and 2 sheriffs.
Viewers scrolling their feeds woke to the claim that over 40 officers had been arrested, accused of working directly for El Mencho's Jalisco New Generation cartel, one of the most violent drug organizations in the world. For anyone familiar with cartel operations in the region, the idea wasn't unthinkable. Texas has long been a logistical artery for CJNG's smuggling routes, its highways feeding narcotics north and weapons south. The cartel, led by Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, known as El Mencho, rose from the ashes of Sinaloa's splinter factions in the 2010s and expanded rapidly across U.S. corridors. DEA data from as recently as September 2025 confirmed that Texas remains one of the primary U.S. hubs for CJNG fentanyl and meth distribution, with seizures in places like Laredo, Houston, and Dallas routinely linked to the group's networks. The supposed raid fit an established pattern: a cartel exploiting American corruption to secure its foothold. Stories of U.S. border agents tipping smugglers, accepting bribes, or waving through vehicles are not urban legend. They're documented in federal court records. In February 2025, for example, a U.S. Customs and Border Protection officer in El Paso was arrested by the FBI's West Texas Border Corruption Task Force for his role in a smuggling ring that used official lanes to move migrants and narcotics north.
Alert! Alert! Border Patrol agent arrested in El Paso, Texas. Right here, 32-year-old Manuel Perez busted for smuggling migrants into the United States.
The officer, Manuel Perez, allegedly leveraged his badge to provide safe passage for cartel shipments, and in October of that same year, another Border Patrol agent in South Texas was caught transporting drugs and migrants for an unnamed cartel, described by prosecutors as a dirty cop who sold silence for cash. These incidents, isolated, individual, but real, helped the morning's viral story feel plausible. As the claim spread, screenshots purportedly from local scanners circulated online. DEA has breached Laredo PD HQ. 42 officers detained statewide. No official source accompanied them. Yet the narrative had momentum. To the casual observer, it seemed that the DEA had uncovered a network of Texas police departments under cartel control, an extraordinary breach of the public trust. Historically, Texas has seen corruption in law enforcement with direct cartel links. By 2024 and 2025, federal investigations documented a surge in money laundering and gun-running operations across Texas, including a January 2025 indictment charging 40 civilians in Houston for laundering cartel profits, and a separate multi-state bust that charged 24 traffickers with distributing fentanyl and meth along Interstate 35. None of these involved uniformed officers. Yet by the time those facts reached the public, the viral claim had already leapt ahead of the record. On social platforms, videos recycled the same grainy clips: police cars idling, DEA jackets in dim parking lots, stitched together with narration claiming that Texas stations run by El Mencho's cops were under siege. Some posts used real footage from earlier, unrelated cartel raids in Mexico, particularly from Tijuana's December 2023 violence, when CJNG-linked factions turned on corrupt local police who had stolen drug shipments. In that episode, Mexican officers were executed in public view, leading to international headlines about dirty cops ships hunted by the cartel. As those images traveled north, YouTube channels repackaged them under new titles, swapping Tijuana for Texas to maximize clicks. In the online ecosystem of narco reporting, context often dies first. During 28-25, border misinformation surged. Rumors of mass ICE raids in Dallas, viral posts about DEA gunfights in Houston, even fabricated press statements shared under the agency's logo. CBP itself issued warnings that smugglers were spreading false claims of raids to manipulate migrant movements, exploiting panic for profit. Against that backdrop, a headline about DEA agents storming Texas precincts fit the audience's expectations. At first glance, the scale of the alleged operation seemed feasible. Major multi-agency raids, DEA, FBI, Texas DPS, do occur. Operation Rainmaker in 2024, for instance, netted 23 cartel suspects in coordinated arrests across multiple states. But such actions never stay quiet. A true federal sweep involving dozens of officers would have generated an avalanche of filings, press briefings, and leaks to outlets like the Texas Tribune or the Houston Chronicle. On November 7, 2025, none of those channels showed any trace of the supposed Texas raid. Still, skepticism alone couldn't stop the story. The mention of El Mencho lent it gravity. For more than a decade, he symbolized untouchable power, his cartel's reach stretching from Guadalajara to Los Angeles, from port smuggling rings to synthetic drug labs.
Under the orders I signed today, we will also be designating the cartels as foreign terrorist organization.
By 2025, CJNG was responsible for an estimated 80% of U.S. fentanyl traffic, prompting the U.S. government to label it a foreign terrorist organization earlier that year. In that context, imagining his network penetrating American police stations was a dramatic but psychologically satisfying narrative. The villain had finally crossed the line. Meanwhile, real DEA operations were unfolding quietly across Texas. In May 2025, agents in South Texas seized 1 million counterfeit fentanyl pills linked to CJNG supply chains. A few months later, Treasury sanctions hit CJNG fuel theft fronts operating in Texas oil fields, while retail theft rings in Houston were busted for laundering profits back to Mexico. Each case revealed pieces of the cartel's infrastructure, but not the systemic corruption the viral posts claimed. The Texas narrative persisted because it borrowed credibility from proximity. Texas is where the border feels immediate, where every fentanyl seizure or human smuggling case feeds into a sense of siege. By late 2025, disinformation analysts tracked a 300% spike in cartel cops hashtags following reports of law enforcement corruption elsewhere in the South. Posts framed these events as signs of collapse. DEA purges corrupt Texas police. Mencho finally infiltrated the border. None cited verifiable documents. The real cases told a different story. Rather than mass arrests, what existed were sporadic federal stings targeting individual officers or smugglers, each meticulously documented. In El Paso, Houston, McAllen, and along the Rio Grande, investigators found greed and vulnerability, not institutional capture. As the DEA's 2025 National Drug Threat Assessment noted, CJNG's U.S. strategy relied on bribes and distribution partnerships, not command structures. Economic infiltration over territorial control. By the end of that first week of November 2025, digital forensics analysts could find no DEA, DOJ, or local agency record matching the supposed Texas operation. There were no arrest dockets for 40 officers, no seizure logs, no court filings under any Texas police corruption case involving CJNG or El Mencho. Yet the absence of proof barely slowed its momentum. The story had already jumped language barriers, appearing on Spanish-language forums and in Telegram channels that specialize in narco-political rumors. In truth, what audiences were reacting to wasn't a single fabricated event. It was a composite of several genuine ones. The real DEA fentanyl seizures in Texas, the confirmed corruption busts of individual border agents, and one genuine multi-officer takedown that occurred not in Texas, but hundreds of miles east in the Mississippi Delta. That case, announced on October 30th, 2025, involved 20 defendants, 14 of them law enforcement officers, accused of escorting what they believed believed were Mexican cartel drug shipments. The FBI called it a monumental betrayal of public trust. But at the moment this Texas raid story exploded, few realized the overlap, the details, the number of arrests, the supposed cartel connection, even the early morning timing mirrored the Mississippi operation almost perfectly. As fragments of that real case crossed social media, accounts hungry for border drama grafted the Mississippi facts onto Texas geography, adding El Mencho's name to maximize clicks. By the time the DOJ held its Mississippi press briefing, the Texas version had already gone viral. The real story beneath the myth.
Happening, the FBI announcing indictments against 20 people, including 14 current and former Mississippi and Tennessee police officers in a drug-related bribery probe.
The morning of October 30th, 2025, federal agents fanned out across the Mississippi Delta, executing sealed warrants that had been months in the making. By sunrise, 20 people were in custody, 14 of them wearing badges, 2 elected sheriffs, a chief deputy, sergeants, patrol officers, and a state trooper, taken from their homes, offices, and cruisers in simultaneous arrests, coordinated by the FBI's Jackson Field Office, the DEA, and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Mississippi. The operation was no rumor. It was real, federal, and devastating to the small rural counties it hit. Washington, Humphreys, Sunflower, and LaFleur, places where entire departments number fewer than 20 officers. Investigators had spent 3 years cultivating informants and undercover contacts after tips from local drug dealers suggested deputies were offering paid protection runs for what they believed were Mexican cartel shipments. FBI agents posed as traffickers, orchestrating controlled movements of 25 kilograms of sham cocaine along U.S. Highway 61, paying bribes ranging from $1,500 to $37,000 per escort. Patrol cars, lights, and sirens were used to shield the convoys from scrutiny court filings, described how Sheriff Milton Gaston of Washington County allegedly treated the bribe money as unreported campaign contributions, granting the supposed cartel its blessing to move shipments locally. Sheriff Bruce Williams of Humphreys County faced similar accusations, accepting multiple payments and authorizing deputies to join the escorts. A Sunflower County Chief Deputy, Marvin Flowers, was taken from his home before dawn. Others, like Sergeant Chaka Gaines of Greenville PD, were caught accepting $5,000 for a single run. Their patrol logs later altered to mask the time gaps. No real cocaine moved through the Delta that year. The FBI ensured every shipment was inert, but the betrayal was genuine. Acting U.S. Attorney Clay Joyner called it a monumental betrayal of public trust, while FBI Special Agent Robert Eichhoff told reporters the corruption strikes at the heart of the community. The defendants, all arrested within hours, faced federal charges of conspiracy to distribute controlled substances under 21 U.S.C. paragraph 846 and firearm violations under 18 U.S.C. paragraph 924 GACE, crimes carrying potential life sentences and fines up to $10 million. For the Delta's impoverished counties, where median deputy pay barely reaches $50,000 and poverty rates exceed 30%, the news landed like a second storm. Entire agencies went under internal review. Mayors convened emergency meetings to reassure residents that remaining officers were clean. The FBI emphasized that poverty and isolation had made these departments prime targets for bribery, remote, underfunded, dependent on personal trust rather than oversight. As the indictments unsealed, the details read like a script too cinematic to be true. Patrol cars escorting phantom drugs, sirens clearing highway lanes for convoys that carried nothing but government evidence kits, deputies pocketing envelopes in convenience store parking lots, each transaction recorded, every conversation captured on audio and video. The sums were modest, but the symbolism immense. Within 24 hours, federal press releases labeled it one of the largest domestic police corruption busts in recent years, rivaled only by isolated cases from the 1990s. Yet nowhere did any official mention CJNG or El Mencho. The undercover agents had posed as members of a Mexican drug cartel, but no real cartel was involved. The purpose was to expose vulnerability, not dismantle a foreign network. Online, however, those nuances evaporated. By the time the FBI held its afternoon press conference in Oxford, Mississippi, fragments of the story were already migrating west across social media. A viral post on X summarized it inaccurately. DEA raids Texas stations. 40 officers arrested for working with El Mencho. The misquote doubled the arrest count, swapped states, and inserted the cartel's most recognizable name. From there, repetition did the rest. The Mississippi case contained every element of viral fuel: corrupt cops, cartel money, federal stings, and rural poverty. To audiences already primed by border anxieties, Mississippi Delta sounded peripheral. Texas sounded central. A few influencers simply edited headlines, replacing one geography with another. Small Reddit threads and TikTok clips began to blend footage from the Delta arrests with background images of DEA trucks in Laredo. Within 48 hours, the hybrid narrative had reached tens of thousands of views. Semantic tracking later confirmed that the phrase "cartel cops" spiked 300% online after the Delta news, with users connecting the story to Texas border chaos. Low-credibility narco news channels repackaged Mississippi's federal briefings as Texas content, intercutting unrelated footage of CJNG gunmen from Jalisco. The algorithm rewarded engagement, not accuracy. Behind the noise, the facts of the Mississippi bust remained meticulously documented. Each defendant's name, charge, and agency affiliation appeared in the federal dockets unsealed that week. All 20 remained detained, pending arraignment. Most faced 5 to life sentences. The DOJ estimated total bribe payments at just over $100,000, distributed across 2022, 20, and 24. Not a single cent traced to a Mexican bank account. The emotional impact on the Delta's towns was harder to quantify. In Greenville and Hollandale, residents described the arrests as a gut punch. For years, those officers had been local heroes, the ones who answered overdose calls and coached youth sports. When federal agents hauled them away, the communities turned inward, asking how far corruption might reach. Sheriff James Haywood of Sunflower County, whose chief deputy was among the accused, said simply, "It's devastating. We have to earn trust again." The Mississippi Delta bust, officially unnamed but widely nicknamed the Delta betrayal, became a template for how U.S. law enforcement investigates itself. Multi-year infiltration, staged shipments, carefully controlled arrests. It also became the seed for the Texas hoax. When content farm channels later revisited the story, they re-edited the timeline. One upload labeled the arrests Operation Shattered Shield Texas, claiming DEA agents had raided multiple stations across the state. Another channel swapped Mississippi's courthouse footage with B-roll of Austin skyline, presenting it as a Texas event. Even the arrest count, 20, was rounded up to 40+ for drama. The result, a convincing hybrid where authentic corruption met imagined cartel command. To many viewers, the difference between a sting and a raid blurred into one. And because CJNG already dominated headlines as the fentanyl supplier overwhelming Texas hospitals, audiences filled the gap with assumption. This convergence of real corruption and online embellishment illustrates a larger pattern in 2025's information ecosystem. As official agencies crack down on transnational crime, unauthenticated channels exploit the vacuum between investigation and indictment. When facts are sealed or technical, speculation races ahead. The Delta story hit that gap perfectly. Too credible to ignore, too complex to understand at a scroll. For the agencies involved, the fallout was twofold. In Mississippi, federal officials expanded oversight grants for rural departments, citing structural vulnerabilities exposed by Operation Delta. In Texas, where online panic surged, state police spent days fielding calls from citizens asking whether their local departments had been raided by the DEA. No such operations occurred. By early November 2025, the DOJ and FBI had clarified publicly that the Delta bust was limited to Mississippi and Tennessee jurisdictions, unrelated to any Texas police department. But the viral headline had already escaped correction loops, even as traditional media ran fact checks. No, the DEA did not raid Texas police stations. Those articles drew a fraction of the engagement that the original videos achieved. The Mississippi case remains a study in how truth and myth collide in real time. On paper, it was an ordinary, if extraordinary, example of federal oversight. Sting operations, indictments, courtroom protocol. Online, it mutated into evidence of a nationwide cartel takeover. El Mencho's shadow and America's vulnerability. When the story of DEA raids on Texas police stations reached its peak, the algorithm had already done its work. The name El Mencho, synonymous with terror in Mexico and fentanyl devastation in the United States, guaranteed traction. But beyond the sensationalism lay an uncomfortable truth. While there was no evidence of Texas police departments being run by CJNG, the cartel's economic and logistical influence in the region was undeniable. Understanding that influence requires tracing a decade of U.S. enforcement actions, policy shifts, and socioeconomic cracks that have made border states uniquely vulnerable to bribery and rumor alike. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJNG, rose from the ashes of the Sinaloa cartel's internal schisms around 2010, transforming from a regional Mexican faction into one of the world's most lethal and economically sophisticated drug enterprises. Under Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, El Mencho, CJNG built a transnational network that leveraged globalization itself, precursor chemicals from Asia, synthetic lab expertise from Michoacan, and smuggling corridors through the Texas-Mexico border. By 2025, DEA analysts identified CJNG as responsible for up to 80% of the fentanyl entering the U.S. market, a dominance that led the U.S. government to designate the group as a foreign terrorist organization, FTO, in February 2025. That designation was more than symbolic. It activated powerful legal tools, financial sanctions, asset freezes, and expanded criminal liability for anyone inside or outside government who provided material support to CJNG. It also gave the DEA and FBI broader authority to treat cartel bribery not merely as corruption, but as terror facilitation. Yet the shift came too late to prevent the spread of misinformation. To the casual social media user, terrorist cartel and Texas police raid felt like chapters of the same story. In reality, the cartel's Texas footprint has been large, but logistical rather than institutional. Through the 2010s and early 2020s, CJNG embedded itself in supply chains, not precincts, exploiting ports like Laredo and Eagle Pass to funnel methamphetamine and counterfeit fentanyl pills northward, while laundering cash through front companies in Houston and Dallas. Project Python, a DEA-led strike launched in 2020, dismantled several U.S. distribution nodes, resulting in more than 600 arrests and the seizure of 20 tons of methamphetamine and $16 million in cash. 5 years later, Operation Viper Strike replicated that success on a larger scale. Between September 16th and 29 of 2025, it netted 670 arrests across 12 states, including more than 100 in Texas alone, alongside 77 metric tons of drugs and 244 firearms. None of those operations involved American officers on the cartel's payroll. CJNG's strategy on U.S. soil is pragmatic. Instead of commanding through fear, as it does in Mexico, it buys compliance, one bribe at a time. Investigators describe a model of franchise corruption. Loosely affiliated distributors offer short-term payments to individual public servants for information or logistical favors, but no structural infiltration of entire departments. The DEA's 20/25 National Drug Threat Assessment summarizes it bluntly. CJNG prioritizes economic infiltration over territorial control within the United States. Even so, those micro-bribes exploit very real weaknesses. The border regions of Texas and the rural South suffer from chronic underfunding, low salaries, and long-standing social inequalities. Deputies often earn half the national median for law enforcement officers. Departments lack body cameras, audit systems, or digital oversight. The Mississippi Delta case exposed what happens when poverty meets opportunity. Small-town officers tempted by a few $1,000s to look the other way. The DOJ's internal reviews after the Delta arrests noted that 8 of the 14 accused officers came from counties with poverty rates above 30%, the same socioeconomic band found in large stretches of South Texas. Federal analysts see this not as ideological corruption, but as transactional survival. A 2025 Denton's report on DOJ enforcement described how cartels target high-poverty corridors where oversight lags and temptation is high. Bribes average $3,000 to $10,000 per transport, roughly a month's pay for many deputies. Such economics blur moral lines. No grand conspiracy, only quiet compromise. Yet in the public imagination, each compromise adds weight to the myth of institutional collapse. Technology has amplified that distortion. Encrypted apps like Signal and WhatsApp now allow traffickers to send anonymous location data, shift payments through cryptocurrency, and recruit insiders without face face-to-face contact. The V-Comply 2025 analysis on corruption trends observed a 30% rise in tech-enabled bribes, where payments move through shell accounts or prepaid crypto wallets, making detection nearly impossible until after an indictment. These techniques allow cartels to simulate coordination that looks on social media like full-scale infiltration. The misinformation cycle completes itself when content farm channels repackage fragments of truth with invented details. The most notorious of 2025, a YouTube upload titled DEA Texas Raid Exposes El Mencho's Cops, originated from a channel calling itself Cipher Signal. Using stock footage and AI-generated narration, the video claimed that 40 Texas officers had been arrested for protecting CJNG shipments, citing a non-existent Operation Shattered Shield. Within 24 hours, it reached 74,000 views before any journalist could verify that the actual arrests, 20, not 40, occurred in Mississippi, not Texas. The anatomy of that misinformation is revealing. Each claim borrowed something real. The number of arrests from the Mississippi Delta bust, the mention of cartel escorts from federal indictments, and the geography from authentic Texas gang sweeps earlier in 2025. In April, the Tren de Aragua gang raid in Hays County resulted in 47 detentions, a figure that easily morphed into 40 officers arrested once context was stripped away. In June, Operation Showdown in Fort Worth produced 76 arrests and massive fentanyl seizures. Another number soon recycled into conspiracy posts claiming Texas DEA raids. None of those events involved police corruption, but in the churn of digital rumor, they fused seamlessly with the Delta timeline. Meanwhile, CJNG's actual criminal footprint inside Texas remained visible through measurable law enforcement data, not rumor. In May 2025, the Treasury Department sanctioned multiple Texas fuel theft rings linked to CJNG intermediaries, freezing assets worth over $10 million. In August, the Houston DPS dismantled a retail theft laundering operation, funneling stolen goods to Mexican buyers for cartel cash-outs. And in September, DEA agents seized 1 million counterfeit fentanyl pills from CJNG suppliers in South Texas, proof of a thriving trade but no suggestion of captured precincts. Each of these operations demonstrates the same paradox. CJNG's presence in Texas is deep enough to distort economies, but shallow enough to leave law enforcement structurally intact. The cartel's goal is profit, not governance. It doesn't need to run a police station. It needs a single officer willing to ignore a truck at 3 a.m. For every bribe that succeeds, 10 fail. But the few that succeed sustain the myth of systemic rot. The myth is powerful because it feeds existing fears. Border states have become the stage on which Americans project anxieties about migration, crime, and federal control. Political narratives amplify those emotions, often without evidence. In the aftermath of the 2024 election cycle, both fringe activists and foreign disinformation campaigns weaponized the language of collapse. Cartel cops, civil war at the border, DEA purge. Chinese and Russian state-linked outlets were documented republishing English-language posts about supposed U.S. cartel takeovers, further inflating engagement. Each iteration made the fiction harder to debunk, yet facts remained stubborn. No record in the DEA, DOJ, or FBI databases corroborates any Texas police station raids connected to El Mencho or CJNG as of November 7, 2025. The Mississippi bust stands alone as the largest law enforcement corruption case of the year, and it involved undercover agents, not actual traffickers. Still, for many viewers, perception has overtaken documentation. In February 2025, when the FTO designation against CJNG took effect, Attorney General statements promised that the new authority would bring justice to those aiding the world's most dangerous narcotics network. But enforcement alone cannot address the structural roots that make corruption tempting or misinformation profitable. Federal funding has since increased. The DOJ allocated $50 million for border integrity task forces and $20 million for rural integrity grants, programs that add body cameras, audit software, and whistleblower protections. These measures may limit future betrayals like the Delta case, but cannot stop viral myths from taking their place. CJNG's power endures because it mirrors globalization's logic: flexible, decentralized, profit-driven. Its U.S. model depends not on control, but on corruption as a service, a brief transaction that vanishes after the payoff. And as long as those microtransactions exist, every rumor of cartel cops will sound plausible, enough to click. By the close of 2025, the narrative had come full circle. The Mississippi defendants awaited trial. Texas agencies had weathered a week of unfounded panic, and El Mencho himself remained at large in Mexico's highlands, still commanding a $10 million U.S. bounty. The viral story that began with flashing lights on a Texas highway had dissolved into data and court filings, but not before reminding the country how thin the line is between information and imagination. In the end, the so-called DEA raids on Texas police stations never happened. What did happen was more subtle and more instructive: a real network of greed exposed in Mississippi, a real cartel operating economically in Texas, and a real information system that transformed scattered facts into a myth powerful enough to convince millions. It's a pattern that defines modern narcotics reporting, a collision of reality and digital theater, where the shadows cast by men like El Mencho stretch far beyond the reach of his actual empire. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, click on one of the suggested videos on your screen right now for more amazing content.